It's okay. It's always exciting.
I hate technology.
I
It's
understand.
too tricky for me.
See, I
Oh,
I
good
got
to see
I was introduced in a really good way. I got turned on to light shows when I was still in high school. Okay. Did you come late to music?
in terms of playing, I tried. I mean, I was a choir boy first. I had an inherent musical ability. So from when I was about 8, 9, 10, I sang in the church choir
Oh,
and
nice.
had perfect pitch. And
Cool.
but I was always listening to music really early on, in the 50s when I was very young. But of course, it changed in the 60s,
Yeah.
and the whole new genre like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and then listening to start soul music, um, Motown, and all sorts. I tried learning all sorts. Everyone wanted to play the guitar. Um, But my parents were a bit mean. They said, "Oh, I had to learn to play something easy or simple like a recorder before they would buy me a guitar." But I did play on and off. But so only with, I mean, I guess really seriously in the last 10, 15 years. Maybe because had more time to sit and do the necessary kind of work, practicing and learning. Um, but I think I think what really helped it along was when I started, like 2010, 11, about 15 years ago. Met some people, got to start playing in a band, and I'd taught myself to play trumpets,
Oh, yeah.
and then an alto sax, and I played. We had a kind of teachers and school kids, students bound together. We played in the interval in certain when we had like talent shows, and then we played some gigs with one of the year heads. He put on these sports events for disabled people. I think it was called I can't remember but it's like what they have now is when they have the Olympics, they have the follow up to that, which is start. So we used to play at some of the when they had like every term they would have a sports day, and then in the evening there would like a barbecue and disco and music, and we did about half hour, 40-minute set.
Cool.
Um, Played covers. Those, I think the thing there, when you're playing with the band, you realise how integrated you have to be, how much you have to be listening to what's going on, and rehearse, and sort of timing. Whereas when you're playing on your own, you just tend to sort of end up noodling about and not doing very much. But I mean, I think because again with the poetry and literature, I'm talking about like say with the beat poets. I think music, particularly jazz, was an essential ingredient to their movement, to their inspiration. I remember, I think I was having been reading Kerouac off and on since my 20s. Um, Catching up with all of that stuff like with Ginsberg and Thursburg and getting into jazz, sort of realize actually what how important that was culturally, because it was sort of I guess they were kind of outsiders. They were
Oh, yeah. Very
not
much
playing
so.
classical music. They weren't part of the establishment. They played in perhaps what people would have thought of as low dives or
Right. Right.
clubs. They were associated with things like drugs and you
Prostitution,
know
gambling, and all that.
process of the whole thing like that. And I think that was that element of rebellion, rebelliousness and being like counterculture. And of course, they were way ahead of, say, like the beatniks or the hippies
Yeah,
in the 60s in San
yeah,
Francisco. In fact, I would imagine, that would, the hippies and people in San Francisco, Hyde Ashbury, they probably, would be inspired by the beats.
very
And then
much
you
so.
got to learn about people like Gary Snyder and all the other people, and particularly Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Yeah,
And at some point, I was kind of reading around people not necessarily associated with the beats or that sort of element of counterculture. So I was reading stuff by J.P. Donleavy, the Ginger Man. One of the
really.
first things that was a bit of an eye opener to me was a thing in the sixth form. Like at whole level, we were studying all systems of the classic English lit sort of syllabus. We were like Shakespeare, Thomas Hardy, H.G. Wells, and all of that. And then we had a general studies sessions, and we had I think were probably the coolest English teacher that we'd had. And we were reading Catcher in the Rye by
Right.
J.D. Salinger. And that was like, wow, that's suddenly like a kind of a gear shift to the left, in a way.
Yeah,
And that was like, so, oh, why write it's American? We hadn't really kind of thought about American literature at that time.
yeah.
And here we were, like, really, this is something really different. And then I started picking up things like J.P. Donleavy, Henry Miller, Tropic. Everybody wanted to read Henry Miller,
Right,
not
right.
necessarily for the right literary reasons, but once you got into it, you realize, oh yeah, this is like kind of a shift in tone, from the sort of highbrow literary kind of professorial sort of view overview of what is seen as acceptable kind of literature. And of course, then D.H. Lawrence here was again, I mean, about way ahead of everybody else. But it wasn't until 1960s he had the obscenity trial over the Lady Chatterley's lover.
Right.
Um, and it met in Soto too, but then I realized that, oh yeah, we had this obscenity trials like with the Howl and Ginsberg and then Ferlinghetti. But I like Ferlinghetti probably, and he's often labeled as a beat poet, but I believe what I've read that he didn't actually, he kind of denied actually he really wasn't a beat poet, but he did enable them, set up City Lights Publishing and bookstore. Um, but I enjoyed it. The first time I came across him in fact, it was in a English GCSE anthology that they used for the language and the literature papers. And it was that one about the two trash men in a truck, two scavengers in a truck, two beautiful people in a Mercedes. Just by chance, when they both stop at the same traffic lights, that is the closest, that they come to each other, experience in real life. And then that's a beautiful poem, the way that he sets that out. And I was always looking to try and find, books, collections uh, by Ferlinghetti, and eventually had to kind of looking sort of secondhand bookstores online, like AB Books is a good source. If I can't find it in Waterstones or any of the regular books shops in Reading or in London, I have to start kind of like trolling and strolling on AB Books or any other secondhand kind of online book sites to get that. And again, a lot of that sort of stuff isn't easily available. For instance, I started linking up, and I was reading when I was getting familiar with the beats, and I started reading, oh yeah, so and so, and there's that. So Robert Creeley, I should look at him. All of the people that are mentioned in On the Road, by under their disguises that Kerouac gave them. So, and then I was at one bookshop. There's lots of secondhand bookshops on Charing Cross Road. So if I go up to London, one of my first stops is to walk up Charing Cross Road. And there's one shop I really like, and I love the name of it as well. It's called Any Amount of Books. And every time you buy a book there, they give you a bookmark with the book. So I found it was one I found one by a guy called Michael Horowitz, he was one of the on this side of the pond. So I think he appeared at the Royal Albert Hall, sort of loving there with Ginsberg and and the other sort of British English, Beats fraternity or the alternate poetry fraternity. So I found one by Michael Horowitz, and then about a year or so ago, I found a collection by Robert Duncan. So I immediately recognised the name because he was like with the Black Mountain School of Poets. But for Creeley, I had to go searching on AB Books on the secondhand book stores to find them. They're just not in print here. Yeah, hard to find. So you really have to be a bit of an addict or a to actually get hold of this stuff. You've got to be determined, which I think actually makes it a bit of an adventure in a way that rather than just walk into an ordinary bookshop, Waterstones or whatever, you just pick up a new book. I really want to find this, so I've really got to make an effort to search it out and find places where they have them like secondhand, and they're always in good condition mostly as well. So I'd recommend going on AB Books. You get a lot of stuff from America as well. They kind of a bit like what Amazon do, but I think more ethically.
Cool.
Like the sort of all the independent bookshops and things, kind of like a link to the. So if you go there and you start searching, you will click on and you'll find out that the book is available with this bookseller or that bookseller, and quite a few of them are American booksellers and selling some secondhand books. So there is a problem there. Sometimes the postage is way more than the book.
Astronomical, yeah.
Yes.
At one point in time, our cultures supported the idea of helping books to be sent. There were deductions for the cost of shipping if it was a book. But unfortunately, it's that's gone away. Well, sir, do you have any questions before we start?
I thought we had. Not really.
We haven't formally started yet.
You got to give me a cue.
Well, yeah, I'm going to do an introduction.
But, okay, right.
And then we'll call that was the prequel.
that was a warm up.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great good fortune to bring to you a tremendous poet, a poet known across the globe, a talented, insightful poet whose musings from Cafe Nero are known again across the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian McKenzie, thank you, sir, for coming.
Thank you, Rick. I just want one minor correction there. I generally sign myself Ian J McKenzie.
Okay.
But you can call me Ian McKenzie. I don't want to be too formal with my good friend Rick Spisak. But so my books and anything I submit is always under Ian J McKenzie. I think there are too many Ian McKenzies, so I have to differentiate.
Well, there is one above the rest, sir, if you'll allow me. Mr. Ian J McKenzie, let me ask you this. I have a few short questions that we we'd like to go through. I'm always interested in hearing what different poets think about these things. My whole reasoning for Poets of the East is no matter how wonderful, and they are, our little Zoom sessions are, you know, do you hear voices from across the globe, different people's perspectives? They're telling their honest truth. It's so beautiful. But I'm always intrigued. I want to know more about the poet who wrote that. I want to know what was the motivation, what inspired them, what poets drove them to write, what poets said, no, no, I don't want to do that. So my question, sir, will go toward the poet Ian J McKenzie. Mr. McKenzie, what is the earliest book you can remember?
Probably the Ladybird Book of Roman History or something like that, I think.
Okay, okay.
Uh, it was about maybe four or five. We had a local mobile library. Used to park about a couple of hundred yards, 300 yards up from our street. Used to park at a little side road next to Victoria Girls' School. Um, and I think it was there on Saturdays and Wednesdays or 2 days a week. And you went up, then got your library ticket. And of course, I guess we read all the things like, Famous Five or kind of adventure sort of storybooks for kids. My brother was a big fan of the Biggles stories. Biggles the hero, the World War One fighter ace sort of thing. I didn't really get into that for a while, but what I do remember regarding books, when I was in the church choir, we had this lovely Miss Taylor, who was our choir mistress and organist. And I think she was a doctor of music. When she dressed for the evening or the church sermon, she would wear her full kind of official kind of academic gown. But we had like choir practice twice a week, and we had an attendance record. And the person every month, each end of each month or period, the table in the vestry where we would meet, do the main practice, there would be big piles of books laid out on there, all these linen bound old books, blue linen bound books, that kind of thing. And the one with the best attendance had first choice,
All
and
right.
then right the way down. And one I remember most vividly, I think I must have had a good month attendance wise. And it was one of the first. When I found this one, it was Charles Lamb's Tales of Shakespeare.
Wow.
And that was the first time I think I kind of had some inkling about sort of higher culture in a way, in terms of literature. So I was about 9 or 10, and I was just intrigued reading these stories, but they were basically like prose or the plot lines, prose versions of. I mean, this is Charles Lamb. This is talking about sort of early 19th century writer, um, wife of Lady Lamb, who uh, famously or infamously fell for Lord Byron.
Yeah,
um,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to, yeah, and I think that was again at an early age. I suddenly started, I mean, thought, no, this is interesting. I love reading them. I hadn't read or seen any of Shakespearean plays, let alone read any of the texts to that. Um, and again, my dad had we had sort of like a bookshelf in one of the bedrooms at home, and I remember we had sort of collections of William Wordsworth and Coleridge's collection. I'm not sure that early collection they put together, and a book by a collection of Keats as well in there, but which again I kind of dipped into. But my dad was a big fan of westerns, and I'm not sure, but the guy who wrote the original story that the film Stagecoach was based on.
Hmm.
And I remember picking that up and reading that one time. So I thought, oh yeah, this is like the original story that John Wayne was made John Wayne famous.
Right, right.
But we were watching, I mean, on TV, we had lots of American imports, but we only had black and white TV.
Sure.
And I remember reading, sort of watching, what was it, the Big Sky
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with Kirk Douglas.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
remember in going to Montana in my mind, which is the title poem
Right,
there.
right.
And I read up about it, and I realized actually, yeah, Montana, the Yellowstone Park, Yellowstone River, was where that whole plot, is set. With the fur trappers and then going out exploring in the flatboats. I thought, yeah, there's a link there. There's a kind of connection with what we were watching. So basically absorbing all American culture um, in terms of film, I mean, in terms of cinema, all the big productions, in multicolor or Vista, or whatever it was, or
Yeah,
Technicolor. So
yeah.
American film, we didn't have that. We just had like the all of the sort of the comedies, starring sort of well-known actors now. But the whole sort of British kind of light humour, kind
Mhm.
of, or the some like mystery stories.
Right.
And we used to go to the ABC cinema Saturday morning. There was a Saturday morning club, and we watched things, the old Batman movies and
Yeah.
Flash Gordon,
Right,
where the
right.
spaceships flew over with smoke coming out of the exhaust. Yeah, which kind of like, yeah, and
The
Fu
sparks
Manchu, all
falling
this
down.
kind of, yeah. And I'm sure like people like Kerouac and Ginsberg were into this as well because it was like pop culture in
Yeah.
a way, and then we're on the way back home from the cinema. We'd pinched these bamboo sticks from somebody's allotment and used them. We were playing Zorro.
Sure, sure, absolutely.
um, no, no, and all of that. So it was kind of, yeah, it was quite inspiring, and also the whole kind of your childhood memories kind of revolve around those kinds of again, I would say popular cultural products, films, um,
The
and then
swashbucklers, the Roman
absolutely
war
yes,
movies, stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you this. Um, Now, of course, in school, we write. We have to write. We write reports, we write essays and all that sort of thing. But did you participate in any of like yearbooks or school newspapers or any of that stuff when you were growing up?
we had we didn't really have so much of a school magazine. I don't think we had that same kind of culture. Maybe, in public schools you had more of that. We did have things, we had like amateur dramatics,
Okay.
where we put on sort of short plays when we were in year 7 and 8. And then later on we had, you know, um, uh, things like debating clubs.
Were you a debater,
We-
sir?
I was a bit shy, I think, when I was a teenager. I didn't really, you know, I think my mum said when she used to tease me, so Ian said, he didn't start talking until he was about 2, and then she comes out, and then he's never shut up since. But I was a bit shy then. I think I've come out of my shell kind of, since long time after that. But a lot of the stuff we got involved in was kind of out of school. So things like folk clubs was not a school thing. We had to go out, maybe sort of like places like the Abbey Tavern, which is on the outskirts of town, and then maybe for older people there would be like some of the youth clubs where they'd have local beat bands playing, that kind of thing. In between, then an interval where you had a kind of a pep talk from the local vicar or curate, because the youth clubs were kind of run by the church
I see.
then as
All right.
well. Yeah.
Now, when did you start writing for fun, for your own amusement?
I start. I think I started writing when I was in my 20s, and I was trying to write poetry and also song lyrics because I thought, oh yeah, got to, if you're going to make a load of money, you got to be a songwriter. But they were all rubbish, and I didn't know anybody, that I could play with and get together to form a band there. But
Paul
later,
McCartney
as
was
I
tied up at that point.
yes, yeah. And but I think later years, I started thinking more serious. Like there was some kind of thing that urge inside me that was always there in the back of my head, back of my mind. I wanted to write. I felt that at some point or other I was going to have, going to write or do something, not just sit about just reading or being a passive consumer of, either literature, culture, or music. And but I think the thing that really kicked it off, I was trying to write a bit, but a lot of the stuff I didn't really kind of find my feet, or if you like, my métier until oh, I think when I was in my 50s, early 60s, and then I started playing in a band, and the singer, was writing all the songs we played, and we did all these sort of gigs. So I thought, well, I think I'd try and write some song lyrics and see, see how they go over. And they said, well, we liked it, but it's not really, I can't really sing. So it's more like, to me, it seems more like poetry rather than song lyrics. I said, oh, right. Then I realized then actually songwriting is a completely different art form to poetry. And in some ways, it's not as easy as it sounds. Because when you're writing a song, it's kind of what you leave out. Whereas with a poem, you tend to put more in, it becomes more complex. But then as you start developing your poetic kind of identity, you realize also, well, with poetry, it also works similar to that you can cut it down. If you read some of the beat poets, I'm reading some of Robert Creeley's collections, it seems like he's kind of scaling it down to the bare minimum. So you've got the skeleton. You're not packing in a sort of unnecessary detail or kind of poetic overfilling the space then. And I think as well, I felt that it's the words that do the work, and also you have to leave a space for the reader to, I think, put in their own interpretation. And I think, I mean, I've tried, I think, over the years, and I have learned, I think, since I started joining in with the spoken world online, which I think for me was a real pump, boost, because I was coming across poets like you, like David's, like Rorschach, people who had direct connections with those people that I were heroes or became heroes to me, in San Francisco, New York. Just think of Rusty Rose and all of the people she mentions. Oh yeah, I knew that they were a friend of mine. Okay,
Yeah.
and I started quite shyly at first because I thought, well, all right, these are serious poets, and I felt I'd got to up my game. And then over the years, the feedback I've got, they really appreciate what I'm doing, which kind of made me, I don't know, I just felt, wow, that's something. Because when sometimes you write something, you read it through, you don't really know. You're a bit sort of shy of saying it's brilliant. I mean, I guess you have to be very confident in yourself to write something because, yeah, that's good. Yeah. So, you've got to be someone like Charles Bukowski, who would write whatever. And he think it was the best thing ever written, all these other, amateurs, he thought looked down on, thought, they were,
Well,
they were rubbish.
typically pre-COVID, most poets, if they're not in a university setting, if they're just out in the regular world, you'll find a small group of poets, 10, 15, 12, 6, and you read to them, and you're in your local neighborhood or your local region, you read the same things,
Mm.
you hear the same things. You don't know how you fit in that greater context. But the post-COVID experience, where you're meeting and sitting with and reading to poets from across the globe, you get a better
Mm.
sense, I think, of how your work stands in this larger community. And I think a lot of poets have gotten, if you will, self-respect from reading to these international groups.
Well, they become part of your peer group then. Before COVID, I was doing, as I said, those guys in the band were encouraging me to write poetry, and I said, "Don't worry about the songwriting, write poetry." And
Yeah, you're better at that.
yeah. And so there was a local place, Global Cafe, where we used to hang out a lot at the weekends, and we played a few gigs there with the band. And they had a French guy, who was what was his nickname was Gulliver because he was so tall. He was a huge guy, but he ran a slam event every 2 Sundays, first and third Sunday evening of the month in the Global Cafe. And there was a prize of a bottle of wine or something, if you went through that thing. And that was the first time I actually ever performed any of my poems in public. And funnily enough, the first one I took part in, I won. So like beginner's luck. But I remember, I was writing all these poems, and I was trying to get some sort of identity, some kind of style in my head. But I was kind of not really happy or satisfied with what I was doing. And then I think the breakthrough for me was about 2012, 13. I'd gone down to the south coast, sort of between Swanage and Lulworth Cove, which there is like a kind of a rising. It's called the Jurassic Coast. It's also shale and limestone, is sort of the kind of cliffs and hills rising in between the various kind of communities, beaches. And I was at this campsite. And my last morning there, I was about 7:30 in the morning. I was cooking up some coffee and breakfast. I was just stood by my tent, and I saw this stream of crows or rook flying out over the bay. And I just looked up at this, and I just thought Crow Road. And I wrote some notes down, and I wrote this poem called Crow Road. And it was like I started writing it, describing the scene of the crows, like heavy, German bombers flying over, to raid the farmers' fields and that. And then there was a sudden switch where I suddenly went back to my childhood, and I remembered up the top of the hill, the local cemetery, with about sort of half a mile up the road and from us, and always sort of surrounded by trees. There were huge rookeries there, and I remember they're going up there, and the rookers, the raucous sound of rooks cawing, and it was like almost like I suppose an awakening, sort of like into adolescence. So I like the way that it kind of suddenly, and I just didn't know how I was going to develop it when I started writing the poem, but it went back to this notion of growing up as a child and growing into adolescence and watching and looking up at the crows and wondering what my path will be, looking into the future. And I wrote this down and I read it through. And that was the first time I thought, that is passable. I wouldn't be ashamed to read that or to perform that or to show somebody or submit it to a publication. And that was the turning point. I had was been in two minds. I thought, well, I'm not really being very successful at this. I was in two minds whether to carry on or whether I should bother. Whether was I really a poet or was I just kidding myself? But when I wrote this and I read it through, I immediately recognized that that's it. I kind of crossed a Rubicon. I'd crossed a threshold into a world there. I felt, yeah, I've got something to say, and I know how to say it.
Good for you.
So I'm not sure if everyone has a moment like that. Possibly.
I think so. I think so. I think that there's a decision point that we all reach at some point that I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. This is how I will express myself. And when you discover that other people hear that, that other people can find something worthwhile in those words, in those ideas, in those pictures, uh, I think many of us, at that first appreciation go, yeah, yeah, I can do this. And that's, in fact, one of the questions I was getting at is when did you start to really think of yourself as a writer?
I think that was possibly the moment in a serious way that from that moment on, I thought, yeah, I should continue. Yeah, if I hadn't written that, I might have not bothered. I was thinking, well, that was, and all of the stuff I'd written before that, I did kind of like throw away because I thought, this is like I'm starting, this is like ground zero, starting over, and I haven't looked back, you know. I think, and obviously meeting up with people like you and on the spoken world uh, team. And I was talking to somebody the other week actually, who's runs a place called South Street. It's like an arts place where they put on concerts and various events. And I was talking to him about, I was talking about, oh yeah, this group of people I know, yeah, or people who used to be in Paris, or there's all these American poets. So it sounds like you found your tribe.
Very much so, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what
Well,
we call ourselves.
in my youth growing up, artists were dismissed as at best wastrels heading to destruction, or complete narcissists who, other than their own, scribbling, have no real audience. And when you find that tribe, when you find those people to whom words, thoughts, ideas are important, and then that next thing that happens when someone says, "My gosh, that was amazing." So I think that is a kind of, well, a special kind of Rubicon that we now feel that, yeah, I can safely call myself that. I am a writer. I am a person, who uses these tools to communicate something important.
Did I just mention while we're here on that? I really like to give a shout out for Kemlyn Townbat, who ran the sort of Between the Lines group on Wednesdays, and with people like Ravi Chandra. I think I met you, just saw you there.
Yeah.
Soy Avocado, Jennifer, Li Ming Liang, all the Neil Daswani, people there. But what I liked about that, because like with the I think with that was a small group. But what I liked about that, you didn't just read your poems, you got feedback. We discussed. You read a poem, and then you'd have a few minutes. People would chip in and comment and so on. And you listen carefully then, because like when I listen to Ravi's poem, I want to be able to sort of give some feedback and just sort of or ask him questions about it. So then, yeah, there were those kind of groups. I think they were kind of vital. And I think you realize, when you have movements like the Beats or, whatever, like writers, poets, people do kind of congregate together. So like with the Black Mountain School, you had people in New York and so on. It's kind of somehow you do need a kind of a backing, like a tribe. People
Sure.
who are similar sentiments, similar kind of outlook or values that you have.
Let me ask my next question, sir. There is a spectrum of opinion. On the one side, you should write every day. By God, polish your craft, whether you have inspiration or not. Write, 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 write every day, every day. And then on the other extreme end of it are the poets who say, no, don't force it. Let it come. When inspiration comes, then write. Don't try to artificially craft something. So in that spectrum from write every day to write only when inspiration, where do you fall?
Probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, I have had, wherever I go out, I always carry a notebook and pen because you never know. And also, some of sort of the thoughts or lines pop into my head, usually do it at an inconvenient moment, like 4 o'clock
Of
in the
course.
morning. So, and I do need to write it down, and otherwise it goes, it's gone. But I try to think about writing something, but not every day. And I think if I wrote just something random every day, it would just, I mean, a lot of the time, people perhaps try and persuade themselves that it's real poetry. Sometimes you read it and you think, oh, not sure. It can be rubbish. I think you have to be a bit just sort of self-analytical with what you're doing. And sometimes, I mean, I have an idea for a poem, and some I think, oh, it's going to be a sonnet. It's going to be, I'm going to write in tercets. I'm going to do this. And sometimes you don't realize until you start writing. But I find actually, well, what I do, if I come up with a line, an opening line, if I write it down, write a couple of lines, put it down, and I come back to it later, I can carry it on. If I don't write it down, then I won't remember it and it'll be gone. But I can just, I say, just write a couple of lines. I think, okay, that's a start. I can just put that on the afterburner, and come back to it in days, couple of hours, couple of days, whatever. But the ones that I think the major pieces that I've written have been, oh, months, even years in gestation, where I've written down notes and things or got an idea for a poem. I mean, a typical example, for instance, was taken walking into town once down the towpath, and it was after a stormy weekend, and all this river weed had been pulled up by the overflows in the Thames and in the Kennet. And then as I got nearer to the town centre, all of the swans and the geese were kind of like feasting away on these big rafts of riverweed. I came to near the bridge going over the river, and there was this raft of riverweed, and there was a clock and an apple floating in the middle of the of this raft of riverweed, and it was like one of the proper kind of
Right,
wood
right.
encasement clocks with the white, with the hexagonal face and black. I think it was sort of set at something at like 20 to 2. I think I remember. So I took a picture on my phone, and then I was sat in Cafe Nero's, and I just posted it up there because I thought this is really kind of unusual, kind of really off the off the normal. And I just posted it up on Facebook. I put a caption. I said, "Oh, when did all the clocks stop?" And that became, and I think Leonard Lund read that. He said, "Oh, it's a great line for a poem." But I was a little bit proprietary. I said, "Oh, that's my line." and, and then he said, "Well, it's okay. We can both share it." I said, "Okay, fair enough." But I used that as the title for a poem. Now that I kind of thought this is going to be in my mind. I had this is going to be a major poem. It turned out to be about 10 pages.
Wow.
But and I made notes and I thought I need to get some background. So I started reading through all of T.S. Eliot. I was reading the Wasteland quartets. I was reading Yeats's like The Second Coming. I even started reading. So I had somebody loaned me a copy of A Brief History of Time, by that, who was it? It was Stephen Hawking. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I was reading that. I had no idea what it was about, but it was all about, the existence of, black holes and things. Well, I thought that must be relevant in some way. And I just wrote all these notes. I had pages and pages, like scrap paper full of notes. And I had it was lying on the desk for weeks, months. And I thought I didn't know where to go with it. I wasn't sure. I mean, I couldn't just write kind of ad hoc or just like stream of consciousness. And then I thought, well, there's got to be a starting point. There's got to be a way of getting into this. And often that's it with some of the longer poems. It's like, well, how, you've got an idea, you've got some ideas and scribbled some notes down, but you think, what's my in? Where am I? How am I getting into this? And then suddenly it hit me. Well, when did time begin? It was Genesis, wasn't it? So I came up and I thought, I've got to break this down into sections. And the first one I came out with was Genesis on Remand. And that was the link. So as soon as I got that, it just started flowing. And then I had the next step, there's all different aspects of time. But it seemed like the more work I put into it, the more free some of the ideas were coming into my head as I was writing. I think it was Einstein said, like inspiration is, genius is, 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration.
Right.
But it seemed like that seemed to be appeared to me, yeah, that made sense because the more work and more effort I put into all the background reading and notes and that, as I started writing, all the images, all the sort of scenes, about the swans, grieving swans, quiet, silent swans, suddenly started pouring into, when I was writing it, all these images suddenly just started flowing in. And I couldn't have done that without all of this prep and reading and notes and just trying to work out a structure for it. It would just seem to hinge on that because then once you've got that framework sorted out, then your mind was free to, ideas to flow and writing. And I think I did perform it once in Spoken World online. And it's one of the key poems in Going to Montana near the
A
near the
tremendous
end.
book. A tremendous book, I must say.
Yeah, I'm glad you. Yes, everyone I've sold it or given it, sent it to, has always been very generous with their feedback.
Well, it's
But those are
deserved.
the two key poems. Well, one was the Blagrave Street one on Blagrave Street because that was one of the early poems that came out of sort of frequenting Cafe Nero's by Apex Plaza. And then another one was the Going to Montana in My Mind, which was basically I was writing when Finn was looking, he was doing an anthology of poems 51 states or 50
Yeah, yeah.
states. He wanted someone from each state or somebody who had a connection with each state to contribute a poem. And he said, "Oh, I'm still looking for three missing ones. One's on Montana, one's here." And I said, "Oh well, I tell you what, I've never been there, but I think I wouldn't mind. If you don't get anyone, I'll write a poem about Montana if you like." And then about a day later, so it's okay, I found somebody. So I said, well, I'm going to write a poem about Montana anyway.
Anyway, absolutely. Okay, next question, sir. Are there themes or topics that you return to again and again?
Good question. I think, well, I just recently wrote another poem about throws and looks up the Throw Road with a bit of a gap between them. I, not like, when, like say, sort of Ted Hughes or when people are publishing like a collection, quite often the thing is now that they have a theme, a topic that runs through the poems, like a thread running through all of the poems, some kind of connection. I'm not being up. Well, I did put some poems together under the title Departures, but I haven't had it managed to get it sorted and submitted. Well, I did submit it to Broken Sleep Books, but I didn't get any joy with that. But that was probably the nearest I've got to writing a series of poems with a link, a connection. The one with going to Montana, basically, most of them are connected because that's when I was writing, or the ideas were coming to me. Sitting over my coffee in going cold in Cafe Nero's. But the things like, well, it's like looking out of the window, and that was one of my favourite pastimes when I was at school, because I'm thinking, here am I stuck in this boring French lesson, and I'm looking out the window over the sports fields to the road, running down past the sports fields, and all these cars driving past and people walking past, and I'm thinking, I wonder what they're doing, I wonder where they're going. Yeah, wish I could be. I wish I could be there, not stuck in here. So a lot of ideas are about imagining life, outside, looking through a window, observing things going by. Um, and I don't know, where I mean that one about time, and one of those things that, and I did one on. I watched a film called what was it was a Japanese film by a German director. Um, what was that Lou Reed song? A Perfect World. Is it A Perfect World?
I think so, yeah.
It's Yeah. Well, the film was named after that because the character, the protagonist, who is slowly kind of public toilet cleaner, who takes his job very seriously. He's very, compared to one of his colleagues, who are always he's only interested in, chatting up some birds, and getting some money to take her to a club or something. And he collects all his tapes, the tape cassettes. And one of his favorite, in fact, that's the closing tune is "Perfect World." He's really hooked on American rock culture and things like Lou Reed, and that's one of his favorite songs. And he plays them in his little mini uh, van thing that he uses to go to work and back. And so those were interesting themes there about thinking about, well, what's going on in your head, what's going on in other people's lives.
Okay, let me
Um,
ask you this. Do poets or authors in general have a responsibility to address contemporary societal issues?
yes, yeah, well, I think the answer to that is pretty, definitive yes. But it's how you tackle it. Now, I know there are lots of poets, writers who are very direct, like performance poets, slam poets do this a lot. It's like protest poems. And I often think, well, yeah, Dylan started out as a protest folk singer and that, but he moved away from that. But he's still like he said when he was playing, his gigs in England in the '60s. People were complaining like, "You're a betrayer. You're not a folk singer. You were a protest singer." And then Dylan kind of draws up, says, So they're all my songs are protest songs, which in a way, but you do that. I try to address issues, but not in a necessarily in a direct way. I'm very conscious that I'm trying to create a poem, not necessarily make up a political speech,
Right.
which I think can be a bit sort of boring. I think I can turn people off a bit, and often you can actually hook people in, make them listen if you write in a much more kind of indirect way. But you should, yeah, a lot of my poems are informed by that. In fact, the one, I mean, the poem I submitted to the National Beat Foundation for their anthology, sort of a centennial of Allen Ginsberg. And I did, it was called The Final Letter to America, which I think when I did my set, I think I've included that in there. Considering, I think that's, with the shock awarding, of a International Beat Poet Laureateship from the National Beat Foundation, which again was a total surprise to me. But I think a lot of it had to do perhaps with that poem that I sent in. It was published. I hadn't got myself a hold of a copy yet, so I must do that sometime.
Let me ask you this.
But those,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm saying that's occasion. That's nothing occasional. When I have written poems that may be more direct, but I think more often than not, I try to be a bit low key. I'd be influenced by things that are going on, and they inform what I'm writing. But I'm more concerned about writing good poems.
Okay. Now, if a young person asked you, is poetry worthwhile? Is this something that I should spend time on, or is it so inconsequential that it's a waste of time?
Wow, that's an interesting, deep question. Yeah, my automatic response would be yes. Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily say make it part of as an enforced curriculum. Uh, because when I was at school, a lot of the stuff that we were taught or were made to plow through was stuff that we didn't touch. The reason why we never heard of Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac when I was at school, because nobody ever introduced it in the curriculum. It was only with this English teacher in the general studies group in the sixth form. So we're going to read, we're going to read Catcher in the Rye. Oh, well, who's that by? J.D. Salinger, who's he? Never heard of him. Oh, he's an American writer. Oh, really? I never come across many American writers. And it was like brilliant. It was just so refreshingly different to what we'd been sort of drip fed in our English lessons. But I would say quite often, if you put it in front of them, if you kind of like, well, have you read this? Head, look at this. I think they may be drawn to it. And I think I would say, well, I leave this here lying around. If you fancy having a browse through it, help yourself. Yeah. And sometimes it may be, go to a slam performance because that's kind of an entertainment form, that performing poetry in a way, which actually perhaps is easier. It's a much easier kind of intro into poetry than say, oh, if I just shove up you a copy of the T.S. Eliot's collected poems, dig yourself into that, mate. Yeah. And you think, what? That's a bit sort of heavy. It's like about, introducing you to brain surgery when you haven't even learned how to put a plaster or stitch up a wound, something like that. You need
Okay.
to sort of ease steps into it.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. What makes a good poet?
Wow. Well, makes a good point. I think somebody who presents, well, for me, the person who thinks lets the words do the work. There's poets for, it's horses for courses. There are poets like you do wonderful hilarious comic satirical poems that I think addresses serious issues, but in a way which kind of makes you laugh, like good satire should, that makes you think. What makes a good poet? If someone necessarily doesn't put on airs of a poet, maybe somebody you wouldn't maybe even think of as a poet, but when you read their work, you think, yeah. I mean, like T.S. Eliot famously dressed like a bank clerk for most of his work. Nobody, you bumped into him in the street, you would never have thought, oh, that guy's a poet. Um, I think, whereas on the other hand, if I read, say, or you listen to Bob Dylan's songs, meanwhile, he's writing, well, not pop songs, but rock songs. When you take the words without the music, they're still poetry. There's a poetic element in that. There's an element, people think maybe poets as bohemian outsiders, whereas on the other hand, you have people like Yeats, who was actually a senator, a member of the Irish Senate in his later years. But the idea, what's a good poet? It's anyone whose poetry you read that actually connects with you, I think. And it could be a good poet for me, might not be necessarily a good poet for somebody else. So that's,
Thank you.
but there are people that I think that people will unanimously, universally think, well, they're a poet. Homer definitely was a poet. Shakespeare was a poet, no doubt about it. And so on. And you think, well, yeah, Wordsworth, he was a poet, and Byron and Shelley. But in between that, there's lots of different permutations. What makes a good poet?
Okay. What books are on your desk right now?
Well, apart from on my desk, Allen Ginsberg, collected poems, Swans, Children of Albion was an anthology edited by Michael Horowitz. There's one by Basil Bunting. He's an English poet, was kind of associated with people like Michael Horowitz and the English Beats movements. And we got, there he is, the man himself, T.S. Eliot, Wasteland. And this one, I love this poem, this one here, Les Murray. It's an Australian poet.
Excellent.
And there's a beautiful poem in there. It's called The Quality of Sprawl, which I never heard of that expression before reading that. It's a great poem. And the reason I found that was quite a coincidence. I was reading Clive James. He did a book about critics look at poetry and poem and various poets. And then there's one chapter on Les Murray, who was a very kind of not that well known, not over here, but an Australian poet. And Clive James was kind of singing his praises. And so, oh, that's interesting. I read that. I thought it sounds something maybe I ought to read. And then a couple of weeks later, I was in Oxfam bookshop when it existed, secondhand books. I was scrolling. What I do, I go in and I just have a kind of a scroll browse through the poetry section, see if there's anything that looked interesting. And this popped up. That's so funny, isn't it? I was just reading about him, with Clive James's great kind of piece on him. So I got into, started reading that. And again, there's different facets, different angles that, that you wouldn't maybe have come across if you hadn't met him. And also I got into the Liverpool poets, Roger McGough, Adrian Henry, who were like around in the 60s and 70s. And they were a kind of an English version of the Beats sort of thing. And I remember watching, they did a program, I think 66, 67. There was some program on ITV, and they had a rock band playing in the background, and they would be reciting poetry
Ah,
with the band playing behind them. That was the first time I came across poets reciting to music. And then when I came across Ferlinghetti, I realised I'm not sure if it's in the Gone World or one of the later poems that um, where there's one section at the back, which is a collection of poems which he'd written for accompaniment with a jazz band. And I think a jazz group, which he was doing that in the clubs in San Francisco. So, and I have experimented a couple of times trying to kind of inveigle people to play, or improvise something while I recite one of my poems. But I don't know, it tends to have to be a poem that you think you've written with that in mind. Well,
mhm.
this poem would sound good, like with somebody kind of wailing away on a saxophone or something.
Okay, sir. The last question. Are you ready? The last question
Okay,
is, do you have a question for me?
right. Let me think. Question for you. I've seen a lot of your poetry. I've heard you write your poetry, performing your poetry on Spoken World, and I know there's two sides to you. There's the satirical, fun side, and there's a more serious side. Which one do you think you would give the most weight to, or which side of that would you want to be remembered for?
Well, I can tell you this. When I started taking writing serious, I was about 14. And since I had admired so many humorous poets and so many serious poets, I thought, or let's say I agreed that that idea that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, I had decided I had a motto that my writing would make people think and laugh. So when I write, more often than not, I would say 90% of the time, I try to make people think and laugh. As you said, there are times when the issue is so compelling that you must speak that truth plainly and simply. No varnish, no humor. Just, I just wrote one on Gaza that was, the tragedies are just so overwhelming. And I wrote one recently that is, and no polish, no varnish, just the ugly truth. But you have a good beat on me, sir. I try, if I would be, if I wanted to be known for something, it would be making people think and laugh.
That's a good one. Yeah, I'd agree. I think I probably we all remember. We all mentions Rick Spisak. We all say, "Oh yeah, those satirical poems that had us all rolling about." Yeah. When you mentioned like Gaza, that's when when you're writing about issues like that, and you asked me earlier, I think, and I think, well, I find it hard. I can't if I start writing a poem which is directly about something like Gaza. I'm afraid that if I start writing about something specifically about it, it would become so polemical. I would feel that it'd be more like propaganda than poetry. In the sense that I'm not saying that that shouldn't be because it is such an awful, terrible thing going on. But I think what I would have to do, I'd have to sort of pull back, write a poem with that in mind. But I would write something which wasn't necessarily directly, but you would be able to read something in between the lines that would maybe shed some light on that, but without feeling that I was kind of finger wagging or lecturing or um, and again with what you do because you're making people laugh. It's not, you look back and you think, oh, that was a funny poem. And you say, hang on a minute, there's something serious in that. what he's what he's saying there, which again is a good thing. You're not kind of lecturing in the sense that people are going, oh, he's just preaching, and we all know it's bad in Gaza in a way, you know. And I think that's a kind of a fine line that you have to walk along. I think as all writers or creatives or poets, it's always a fine line. Or how far do I go, writing like directly about the subject, or how far I think I want to maintain some sort of distance. I did write one poem about there's an article I read. It was about a farmer on the West Bank, and he looked over towards the Med, over to Haifa, all the beautiful beaches there. And well, I think I know it was called What a Wonderful View. And I wrote this thing imagining him looking over and seeing that, but he wasn't able to go there simply because there's a thin-lipped man, a bureaucrat who signs permits to say whether you can go here or there, particularly like if you're living in occupied West Bank. If you're a Palestinian, your movements are very strictly controlled by an occupying army, basically. But I wrote this poem, it's about a couple of pages long, and the whole thing was about, what it must be like to be able to look over and see and think, well, what would it be like to just paddle in those cool Mediterranean waters, beautiful golden beach, and yet here you are with your grimy hands, from your hard work, working in your olive grove, and there's some guy somewhere in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem is saying, no, you can't go there. But I tried to do it in a way which wasn't sort of, I think I was trying to avoid giving it an angry voice. I was just trying to be, and that's the thing as well. One of the things, if you're writing about something which is very emotional, quite often, for me, it feels I can think more clearly, I can write more clearly if I'm not getting embroiled in all emotionals of languor and things. I have to step back and be more objective. And when I'm reading stuff, I've been reading a lot of Palestinian poets recently, Mahmoud Darwish, and there's another guy recently, Refat Ariet, a poet who was recently, about a year ago, was targeted by the IDF and killed. And he was a lecturer, he was a teacher of English literature. And I was reading his, or If I Must Die is the title of the collection of prose and poetry. And then Mahmoud Darwish, who was obviously a major Palestinian poet in the 80s, 90s. And I was reading their poetry, and they're writing from a perspective, they've lived that, they've been there, existed through all of that oppression and the violence. And what was the thing that struck me, that I took away with it, is how calmly and how objectively they wrote about it. Whereas you could imagine, your people have been suffering like that. Why are you more angry? But the fact that they wrote that, it kind of brought it home far more stronger to me about the whole situation. The fact that they could write, they were creating poetry, there was poetry to last, not just to be topical and forgotten about in a couple of years when the next news cycle came along. So I can read their poetry anytime, but I'm always aware that these are Palestinian writers and they are writing from a Palestinian perspective. They've lived that, they've experienced those horrors, or their relatives, they know people. And I think in Refat Al-Aria, that's the guy's name, and some of the things, he makes a list of all of he says he doesn't know anybody when he was alive. He didn't know anybody in Palestine, Gaza, that hadn't lost at least 5 or 10 members of their immediate family, their cousins, brothers, sisters, extended family. And you think, wow, that's a, you know, that's something to a big rock to get your head around.
Yeah.
And the way he writes is without the sort of kind of rancor or over emotional, which he would have been entitled to.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's writing in a sense, and that makes it much easier for, I think, for readers to take in. You're not being bombarded with sort of angry reactions. Somebody's thought through. They decided that they're going to transpose their anger and they're going to convert it into, like proper literature and poetry.
Well, my friend, this is the best time of the show for me because I get to invite my poet to please recite some of your work. You have a half an hour, more or less. It's entirely up to you, my friend. Sir,
Okay.
you're on.
No, okay, well, first of all, before I start reading, I would just like to say how privileged I am to be here in the presence of Richard Spisak, a great enabler, a wonderful satirical poet, a man of many talents and,
You're
and
very
technical
kind, brother.
ability.
Very kind.
And lovely to see you back in health again, too, after what you've been through over the last few years.
Yes,
So,
indeed. That I get a chance to make a few more smiles while I'm here, that is
yeah,
my
well,
honor.
lovely. Every time, you're welcome. You're a welcome guest on any Zoom open mic. Well, the first one I'm going to read is one I didn't mention earlier. I wanted to mention Raymond Carver. The first time I came across him, great writer. The first time I came across him was a book of collection of short stories from Where I'm Calling, or Where I'm Calling From. And what I didn't know, he was also, before he was a story writer, he was a poet. And again, I found I've got to find out, some collection and read some of the poetry. And again, not in print. I had to go searching on AB books or whatever, and got collect his collected poetry works. And I just thought he writes in such a way that almost I want to emulate, but I know I can't. And this poem is about that. It's called How Do I Write? Sitting up in bed reading a book of collected poems by Raymond Carver, he's better known for his short story collections. He's commonly referred to as a modern day Chekhov, and I kind of see why that is. But I'm more struck by the natural way he writes his poetry, like he's just sitting there in a bar telling you some anecdote about some everyday event or some tidbits of gossip about a friend or relative or a sour neighbour or what occurred on a recent fishing trip. And it all sounds so natural, conversational even. But when I attempt to emulate his way, endeavouring to rein in the poetics to make it seem more like you're relating some regular occurrence, then you realise kind of how difficult this is. It's not so easy after all, trying to sound genuine. It's like it's a real art form, only it feels as if you aren't aware of what you're actually doing, while really being conscious of the effect that you're trying to create, like walking and chewing gum at the same time. Well, not so easy to accomplish the feat convincingly, like you really mean it, and not come across disingenuous at all and full of shit, like some pretentious barroom bore. But he achieves this time after time without any hint that he's putting it on, because you know instinctively that he really isn't. Those natural cadences just seem to trip right off the tip of his pen or roll off the keys of his rattling typewriter, like it's not really some stylistic technique. honed and perfected to a T, and then trotted out ad infinitum. It's like he really means it. But as I'm writing this piece in the moment, I'm aware in a strange kind of way that I am forcing a naturalistic form of expression, and in a shadowy sense of perception in the back of my mind, I'm not sure if this is poetry at all, but in his hands, even more uncomprehendingly, it is. And this is the complete opposite to Carver's sense of natural poetics and eloquent vernacular, if you like. But then he had lived a lot of life, and he had plenty to say, and he said it so convincingly and so voluptuously in a laid-back kind of way. It's no wonder anyone would want to emulate him, and I'm so in awe of him that in some perverse twist of logic, I think maybe I should stick to the conventional sense of poetic forms, as what should actually feel second nature to me comes across instead as something almost unnervingly quite unnatural. So, first time I've kind of written almost an ode to a writer that I admire. So, I tell you what, I just do this one. I like this one. It's a bit of comedy, there's a bit of humour in this. And it basically came out from an online Zoom chat, with all the things going on at the side where everyone's reading poetry and people are making comments. And I'm not sure how he got round to the topic, but somebody mentioned about, oh, strange the people you see on the London Underground these days, especially late at night. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of kind of Jesus lookalikes on there, isn't there? You see, and then I said, I know, I think I write a poem on that. And yeah, Jesus on the Bakerloo line, because it scans, obviously. So I did this and I did a bit of research. When I say research, basically, I just kind of researched the names of the stations along the Bakerloo line that I thought I could mention in the poem. So I give this a shot. Okay. So it's Jesus on the Bakerloo line. I swear I saw Jesus the other day on the Bakerloo line going south. He wore an iconic gold lacquered glow with the righteous look of unrequited love that hovered on the lips of a silent, sexless mouth. As we rumbled on and past Kensal Green, through Kilburn Park and on to Maida Vale, I wanted so much to ask him many things, like why for 2,000 years we'd not seen him and the second coming, but all to no avail. Perhaps it was a sense of deja vu that kept him shy, keeping a low profile, not wanting to stir up the bitter tears of painful memories of sad betrayals, with a doleful look and a reluctant, wistful smile. I'm not sure if other travellers noticed too, if they had the same curious thoughts as me, as commuters hopped off while others hopped on past St. John's Wood and Warwick Avenue. They all seemed wearily bored with somewhere else to be. And so onwards we sped past Paddington, Edgware Road, Marylebone and Baker Street. I began to wonder and to speculate what the objective of his commission, his purpose, whither he was going, who there to meet. As we pulled right into Oxford Circus, where shoppers mull and rush about, staring into all the well-stocked shop windows, the length of Oxford Street, and all its bright lights and temptations, I half expected him there to get out. After all, if he was on a mission to cleanse the money changers from the nest, the West End haunts of ostentatious wealth would be as good as any other place to begin the second coming, and God damn all the rest. At Piccadilly, he also gave a pass, which had me scratching my puzzled head. Surely so many lost souls there to save in the flesh pots and bars of sleazy Soho, while raising some gin-sodden geezer from the dead. But my disappointment was well-tempered as I recalled the old dictum, Jesus saves, on the lips of all those evangelistas on the prowl of our God-forsaken streets, where the homeless begged in tattered clothes that had seen better days. At Charing Cross I finally alighted, thinking perhaps I'd been taken for a ride. That golden glow had now begun to fade, and he wasn't the saviour I thought he was, but more like off to see his girlfriend, his mistress on the side. But perhaps I'm being too hard on the guy. Please forgive me my sense of levity, but I guess even Jesus needs time off from the hard grind of modern life. Some R&R time maybe, or maybe this was just another case of mistaken identity. Yeah, thank you.
Very nice. Very nice.
I like that. It's more the lighter side of me, I think, on there. Okay, I'll read this one next. This one's called Dirty Notes Go to War. This was one that appeared in an anthology edited by Mark Lipman. He brought out an anthology, Dissent, Poems Against Capitalism and War. And this one here, the one that actually he put it together a codex, which was then digitalized, and it went up in a rocket to the moon.
Really?
So this is
That's right. I heard about that.
exactly, yeah, we watched it together. We watched the rocket taking off. Unfortunately, it landed in the wrong place and tipped over. So the actual main purpose of the experiment uh, didn't come off. But, no, but the poems are still up there. So that's my claim to fame. So it's called Dirty Notes Go to War. And as a background, I started writing a series. I wrote a thing, a poem once, just about dirty notes about the blues and about that not having a perfect fifth, but dirty notes, ones that's been scuffed and roughed up around the block a bit. And I started that's quite an interesting motif that I wrote a series of poems with the idea of dirty notes. So Calypso sings dirty love songs, and the other one was Vera Lynn can't sing dirty notes. Was another one. So this one's Dirty Notes Go to War. Dissonant notes clash, crashing against each other in dirty disarray. The battered bugle calls, its harmonics warped out of shape, slurred and bent against the grey November day. Its tarnished brass blows off key, its plaintive voice reflecting the sad memory of loss with its haunting melody. It is the hollow remnant of a shriller counterpoint, sending a blast of ill intent. Its timbre of mellowed metallic round carries a bitter aftertaste that, no matter how softly it blows, cannot sweeten the sorrowful tears that accompany a battle lost, nor even less, at the cost of a mother's son, can it soften a battle won. So that's my anti-war song, and I think I was taking a line from the Duke of Wellington, and when he commented after the Battle of Waterloo, said the saddest thing after after a battle lost is a battle won. So that kind of nugget stuck in my head. How true that was. And it would perhaps take someone with his experience of wars and battles to be able to make that comment. So this one's called Iced Electric. Some reflections on hero worship. I think I was consciously trying to be a bit beat here, be a beat poet in this one. And I was thinking of a line on a documentary about Dylan, and they were doing like these sort of Vox, headshots, and it was Robert Johnson who produced two or three of his albums in the mid '60s, like Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde. And they were asking him about Dylan, and he said, "Yeah, he had a touch of genius about him." He says it was like God didn't just touch him on the head with his finger. and he kicked him up the arse. So that's how you could only kind of relate, the kind of what Dylan was doing with some of those songs. So this is Reflections on Hero Worship, Iced Electric. He had something of the Holy Spirit about him. It was imprinted on his face as the flash of lightning it lit up the shadows, showing the hollows of his eyes, and we stood watching with bated breath while he walked out on the water, the new Messiah slated for glory and certain death. Screaming hordes crashed through brass-hinged ivory doors, trampling and spitting on every sepulchral relic. It was the age of heresy and hedonism, the old boundaries eviscerated by shrieks of apostasy amidst uninhibited ecstasies of grief, transfigured by narcissistic paroxysm. A prophet in his own land, so doomed to suffer the fate of those gone before and those who come after, and we looked on transfixed, watching a spider weave its web, dangling brazenly by a single thread, the atmosphere iced electric, for lust to raise, waiting for that singular moment, for lust to raise its demon heads.
Very
And
nice.
thanks. I kind of try to pick up some old and some new. This one was a recent one, The Love Song of a Coffee Addict. So it's obviously Cafe Nero related. But I was walking, after doing my shopping, I was walking down the street to Apex Plaza and Cafe Nero's. And suddenly a line came into my head, let us go then, you and I. And I was trying to figure out where, I knew it was from somewhere, but I couldn't remember. And I thought, was it Yates? Or that? And I checked, I looked it up. It was Eliot, and it's from the opening line of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So I decided Eliot said it was okay to, he said the best poets steal. So I stole it.
Steal from the best.
Anyway,
I think the more gentle way is to say we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
that's a good way of putting it, yes. So, The Love Song of a Coffee Addict. Let us go then, you and I, to Cafe Nero's, before the evening fills the sky, and like patients around the coffee table, looking out over Blackgrave Street, we'll sip our Americanos, perhaps a croissant or two we'll eat, and beneath the shady maple trees we'll shelter from the summer's whitening heat. And there we'll sit and chat, talking grandly about this or that. And as the women come and go, we'll compare notes with images from the works of Michelangelo. And as mid-morning approaches noon, we'll check our diaries, measuring out sedentary lives by the length of a coffee spoon. And in age-wearied, hazy minds, we'll stare out at the passing trade with envious thoughts of other lives that we could have led, but spent all those idle hours sitting in a coffee shop, watching our coffees growing cold instead. Okay. Okay. How are we doing for time?
You got time for a few more?
Okay, let's I'll do one. Do we have the screen share?
Sure. Just
I've got
request it.
I've got I'll do it when I've got a couple just at the end. One which is I think it was quite sort of beat in sort of nature. So I'll do these two, and then I'll do one with from the ones I put up on screen there. So this one's called Just Another Bowie Mashup. This is one I performed a couple of times. It's one I took lyrics from Bowie's songs by looking at the various song sheets, and I then started rearranging it, trying to make something interesting out of it. So it's just another Bowie mashup. You would probably recognize some of these lines from somewhere or other. Where are we now? Tell me, how far is it from Warsaw to Potsdamer Platz? Can we go swimming with the dolphins on the way there? And if I lean back on my radio, will we sparkle, waiting for the mound to land, waiting for us all to be heroes? And yes, we can all be heroes sometimes, even though sometimes I feel more like a leper messiah with a heart beating loud as thunder, and my China girl tells me, just you shut your mouth. But if you're happy, will I be happy too? I hope you're happy, but don't tell me that you're better than me. And I won't tell you I'm better than you. And even if I had it all to give away, the blackout hearts, the flowered news, I can't give everything away. Not even if I was the man who sold the world. And even if, like Lazarus, I was in heaven, I'd still be listening to the songs that they're playing on the radio, 'cause, I've got nothing left to lose. So let's go dancing out in space. No one will see us there as we're dancing face to face. And if we keep on dancing, we'll never get old. No, never get old. And I won't ever be the loneliest guy standing in the wind. And you will still be my queen, even if if only forever and one day. And we'll both put on our red shoes and dance the blues away. So where were we now? Tell me once again as we stand here under the moonlight, underneath this serious moonlight. And as we sway, tell me there's a better way. There's got to be a better way. So I think that kind of evolved. And as I was going, I knew I was heading somewhere to those lines. And I think that's not just a kind of a mishmash. I thought it would give it a little bit of a weight there. But yeah, I enjoy performing it as well. And I've had some good responses. I'll read one more short one, then I'll go on to screen share.
Okay.
Rick. This is a recent one, Off-Piste. It was from an image that a friend of mine in Hong Kong, she put up some artwork, and it was like sort of, oh, the work like dreaming of still waters under a willow tree. So this is Off-Piste. Dreaming of still waters under the soft shade of a lonesome willow tree, when the noises off become too much and the lunatics are clogging up the airwaves with their mad, unfounded conspiracies. That's where you'll find me, speaking figuratively, chilling in the arms of a cool breeze, sheltering under shadowy leaves with a notebook and a pen, alone with my idle thoughts, only reveries of flighting freedom to keep me company, catching metaphors in the wind to pin them like butterflies on the pristine white page of my cracked poetry.
Bravo.
And thank you. And I'll finish off if I can go into screen share. I think it's
Just request it and I will grant it, sir.
okay. Well, you are God, aren't you? So you
We all are all.
yes, that's nicely. I'm sorry, no, I do make that a bit of a running joke because you do look like the Michelangelo's version.
Uh,
Like
I'm
a
going to quote.
woman for all we know.
I'm going to quote Firesign Theater. Everything you know is wrong.
Yes. Okay. Let me. Oh, there we go. It's going. I'm going to skip those. There's just one I want. Oh, I'll read this one first. This one's Red Bridge. I was copying this some guy called Art Japanese or Japanese art and images, and keeps on popping up on Facebook, and I keep kind of sharing them. And then occasionally I'll come up with some really good, ideas for poems. So there's that image, some a temple going over a red bridge over a stream. Maybe it's in Kyoto. The red bridge, cross the bridge, railings all blazing red. See where it takes you over a trickling stream to a secret gateway, a blessing of peacefulness to soothe your tired, confused head. Up the rough stone steps, say a prayer and leave a modest offering to keep the ghosts of ancestors appeased, keep the bad spirits hovering there at bay. And in the damp autumnals, the red hands of ash trees add a further splash of torpid heat to ward off the shivering chills that wrap themselves around the hibernating hearts. And I'll finish. This is another one of those images of Japanese art. It's called the praying mantis. Okay. Ghostly sun outlines drooping salix, harboring bodhisattvas, immersed in enlightened compassion. Their slender pendant branches, ideal for sweeping tombs, warding off evil spirits, while the frozen form of a rude interloper cranes its stiff hinged neck, brought out unawares. This femme fatale, the tables turned, finds herself ambushed, silhouetted against incipient rays of interceding light. The predator now prey, while evil thoughts are swept away. There is the praying mantis.
Very nice.
Okay, I love those prints, yes. So I'll stop sharing, and I think that's a good note to end on for my sets, Rick. Absolutely gobsmacked, awed, and appreciate the invitation to come on and
Sir,
share
it's
some
my honor to have
thoughts
you
with
join
you.
me here. You're one of the poets who I have the utmost respect for. You know, we have a lot of very, very talented brothers and sisters, but I tell you, they're the poets that I invite to this little thing to share. These poets to me are each one a star, each one a bright light, and that's why Poets of the East faces these stars. And thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon. On some other
On
some
some
other Zoom,
on some other Zoom
on some other
somewhere.
planet. Somewhere.
Oh, thank you, my brothers.
Cheers, Rick.
Have a good evening.
And you. Love being with you, man.
Likewise,
Cheers.
brother. Likewise.
Bye.